So you've heard me saying since 2008, journalism is dead, but what we're seeing play out now is far worse. The alt-radical left propaganda media has created what I call an informational crisis in this country, and they can no longer be trusted. Let me explain. Now, after the resignation of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, the media is rushing to paint what is a completely false narrative. Let's start with the New York Times and their so-called bombshell report that the press is running absolutely wild with. In reality, it amounts to nothing more than a fake news political hit piece. The Times ran this headline, quote, Trump campaign aides had repeated contacts with Russian intelligence. Now, in it, the writers cite 4 current and former unnamed American officials who offer up vague details about intercepted communications between members of the Trump campaign and Russian officials. But buried in the stories are major caveats, CYAs for them. For example, the only Trump campaign member named was his former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, and we already knew he did business in Russia and Ukraine. It's nothing new. And then there's this, quote, the officials would not disclose many details, including what was discussed on the calls, the identity of the Russian intelligence officials who participated, and how many of Mr. Trump's advisors were talking to the Russians. It is also unclear whether the conversations had anything to do with Mr. Trump himself. So the story is very light on details and actual facts and very heavy on assumption. Then you have Chuck Todd, NBC. He's trying to capitalize off of Flynn's resignation, and this is what he said.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Todd here in Washington. Welcome to MTP Daily, and welcome to day 1 of what is arguably the biggest presidential scandal involving a foreign government since Iran-Contra.
Well, the same guy that said it's a religious litmus test when 90% of the world's Muslims are not included. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me set the record straight, because so-called journalist Chuck Todd, and by the way, he's no Tim Russert, is refusing to do so. Yes, Mike Flynn was wrong. He misled the president and vice president about his call with the Russian ambassador. But so far, there's zero evidence that Flynn broke any law in any way. And Fox News is reporting that there's zero indication that Flynn misled the FBI when they interviewed him. So, of course, this is only the beginning. Take a look at what Thomas Friedman, the whining liberal from the New York Times, Trump hater that he is, watch what he says.
The issue is, what did he tell Trump? Did he and Trump actually cook up this whole thing? Yeah. After the Russians did not respond harshly to the eviction of their spies and diplomats, Trump actually tweeted out some positive encouragement of this. Did the two of them cook this up all along? And it gets, Joe, to 2 other issues. The first is, we have never taken seriously from the very beginning, Russia hacked our election. That was a 9/11 scale event. They attacked the core of our very democracy. That was a Pearl Harbor scale event.
Really? You're going to compare this to 9/11 and Pearl Harbor, where thousands of Americans died? Now, if Friedman ever bothered to do some research and read the joint report from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, it found Russia did not interfere in the election vote totals in any way. Then there's this disgraced former news anchor, kind of laughable, Dan Rather. He took to Facebook to write this idiotic quote, Watergate is the biggest political scandal of my lifetime until maybe now. It was the closest we came to debilitating a debilitating constitutional crisis until maybe now. Really? Maybe? Possibly? Now, this abusively biased coverage, this false narrative, has even led to a Democratic congressman to use the word treason when talking about an American hero, Michael Flynn, General Flynn. Watch this.
If members of the administration are essentially conspiring with Russia, either through the campaign earlier or now in the administration itself, I mean, look, Wolf, that's the definition of treason. This is a very, very serious affair.
Now, of course, you know that the Flynn resignation is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the alt-left propaganda media and their coordinated campaign to purposely misinform you, the American people. They have an agenda. They've also claimed that the president's temporary travel ban, remember this, is either a religious test or anti-Muslim, even though 90% of the world's Muslims are not included. Watch this.
And Mr. Trump established a religious test for refugees from those Muslim countries.
All right, great fear-mongering, but the facts say otherwise. The 7 countries impacted by the ban were first designated by the Obama administration and Congress because they have ties to terror. And as I reiterated, 90% of the world's Muslim population, which is over 40-plus Muslim-majority countries, are not affected in any way. So the breathlessness and the alt-left propaganda media's coverage, it's astounding. Now, all these examples show exactly why you, the American people, should not trust the lazy leftist propaganda media. It's also why President Trump is going to call on non-traditional media outlets at his press conferences, like he did. Take a look, by the way, how CNN reacted. This is priceless.
In the last 3 news conferences, Wolf, all of the questions to the American news media have been handled by conservative press. And I think, Wolf, there's no other way to describe it, but the fix is in. This White House, this president does not want to answer questions, critical questions, about his associates, his aides' contacts with the Russians during the course of that campaign.
Well, maybe CNN shouldn't have colluded with Hillary Clinton's campaign and tried to cover it up. There's a pretty reasonable response there. Now, it's pretty simple. You have a bunch of overpaid partisan hacks that are lazy, throwing one giant hissy fit because their candidate lost. And because of that, they're carrying out this endless, all-out assault against President Trump. Here tonight.